Here are 6 strategies to get into any university or college, but you have a low GPA. One of the major things you need to understand is if you're applying to a top tier program, whether it's in the US, Canada, the UK, or Australia, the success rate for some of these top tier programs is in the single digits. Some of them are 3-4%. Like for example, you look at Harvard, depending on the program, it's less than 4% acceptance rate. And it keeps getting lower and lower. Why? Because number of applicants each year increases, but the number of seats they have does not actually proportionally increase. So you have to be really good. And that's a challenge for a lot of students because, being good at so many different things, it's hard. Of course, it's hard. And that's the whole point. The whole point is they want to get the best of the best of the best. But what if you've screwed up that GPA part? Do you still have a chance? I think you do. We've seen this happen. I think there's a multiple strategies, and I think it's very important for you to watch or listen to this until the very end, because the last strategy that we're going to teach you, we're going to give you 6 strategies, is absolutely the most important that a lot of people overlook. When we're talking about low GPA, you have to manage your expectations. If you got a 1.0, come on, that's not low GPA, that's no GPA. If you got a 2.0, that's still like no GPA, right? It has to be something reasonable, and then we'll tell you how you could go around that GPA and be able to get into a top tier school. I'll introduce myself. My name is Beruz Momeni. In case you haven't watched any of my videos, I'm the CEO and founder here at BMO. I'm joined with our associate manager of consulting, Veronica. So let's go through these strategies, Veronica. And maybe first, before we go into this, I think everyone needs to understand holistic admissions process. Can you explain to us, because especially these top tier schools, again, like Ivy League schools, top 20 schools in the US, some of really competitive programs in Canada and Australia, and let's say Oxford, Cambridge. When we talk about holistic admissions, what does that mean?
One of the things we want to really think about when we talk about the holistic aspect of applications is really that there are multiple components to your application that do not include the numerical data, such as your test scores or your GPA, right? Like one of the most important elements, of course, is your Common App essay. So this is a perfect opportunity to now showcase why it is that you're an exceptional candidate through your writing, right? So having a captivating story and explaining your reasons for deciding to pursue college is definitely a part of your application that could really stand out enough to committees to make them say, you know what, I want this individual to be a part of my school. Same thing, what type of activities are you involved in, right? So the kind of extracurriculars or volunteer activities that you bring to the table will also influence the admissions committee. So provided that you're able to prepare your application early enough, plan it out such that it is absolutely flawless, and the only thing that perhaps stands out as a negative is that GPA, right? That is something that can be overcome by the other components of your application. So I think that only zooming in on the GPA is not necessarily a good strategy.
In fact, we've seen people who get rejected with perfect standardized test scores and GPA because they didn't understand that they have to make the rest of the application components also fantastic. So holistic means most schools, especially top tier schools, now look at everything. It's not just your GPA, it's not just your standardized scores, it's also your application material, it's your letters of recommendations, it's your experiences. If they invite you for an interview, how are you conducting yourself during an interview? All of those things add up before they make a decision. You get an overall score, a holistic score, then you're assessed against others, and that's how you go. So each component gives you a maximum number of points, and that's it. You cannot go beyond that maximum for that component. That's why we've seen people with perfect GPA and perfect stats still not be able to get into Harvard because they didn't have good applications, for example. What are your strategies? The strategy is, if you have a lower than spectacular GPA, is to make the other parts of the application process absolutely spectacular, so you don't give them any other excuse, and you balance the scale in such a way that your overall score is still one of the top scores overall amongst all applicants, and you're selected. This also includes, I should say, an honest explanation of why your GPA is not what it's supposed to be. You cannot just not talk about the elephant in the room, because their first question is, this person is, lazy. Is this person just slacking off? What were they doing? That makes no sense. They want to just reject you, right? Remember, some of these schools get tens of thousands of applicants, and they're going to only select 3% of those applicants. So they don't really have time for nonsense. So you have to go in and provide an explanation that is not an excuse, that A, you're taking responsibility for your shortcoming, the B, you learn from it, and C, you have a strategy that will never happen again, and D, hopefully you have proof that you've learned your lesson and it's never going to happen again. That's the first part of this equation. The second part is make sure your standardized test scores are absolutely fantastic. It's ACT, SAT, whatever they require. If it is required, not every school requires them anymore, including some of the top tier schools. If they do, make sure you do absolutely well. Because now, if your GPA is on the low end, then your standardized test score is also, how can you explain all of that, right? It's just that it becomes like too many excuses. The other thing Veronica mentioned was making sure you've engaged in meaningful extracurricular activities that show commitment and progression. Commitment means you were with that activity for a long-term sort of a period of time. So not something you did before your college application 2 weeks ago. I'm talking about some things you did for a year, 2, 3 years. Those are good ones. That's commitment. Progression, meaning you progress in that. Let's say, for example, I don't know, you worked at McDonald's. At the beginning, they just asked you to mop the floor. Then they said, okay, you could now help with the assembly line they got set up there. You put the burgers together. Then they said, oh, you know what? You want to become a part-time shift manager? That's progression. That's pretty cool. Beyond extracurriculars, what else can you do? You have to get absolutely fantastic letters of recommendation. This should be from people who know you really well, that could support your application and talk about your character and explain why the school should accept you as one of their students. So this should be somebody you preferably know in the long term. Again, if it's somebody who doesn't really know you or doesn't know you for a long term, they're not going to have much to say. So that's really important. Lastly is your application components. Your application, your Common App, your essays, any type of a list of activities they ask you to fill out, and your interviews, if you're invited for an interview. You have to go in absolutely prepared, because an application or an interview that is sloppy shows that you don't prepare in advance. If you don't prepare in advance, that means you're not conscientious. If you're not conscientious, sorry, you're not going to Harvard if you're not conscientious. That's it, the end. Remember, you need to be the top 3%. So the tolerance for the admissions committee person to want to put every applicant in the rejected pile is actually the type is like zero tolerance for any type of weird behavior. So what does that mean? Start your application early, brainstorm ideas, get expert feedback. You don't necessarily have to come to someone like BMO to do this for you. Of course, we're biased. We're going to tell you should do that, but you don't have to. If you have somebody that could actually help you out, if you're a parent and you're watching this and you have somebody who is, I don't know, master's, PhD, or they have higher education, or they have admissions committee experience, they can help you out, and they're willing to help and actually help, and they're not worried about offending you. That's the key. The problem is, even if you have somebody who's got a PhD and has been on an admissions committee, if they're family and friends, usually they don't feel comfortable giving you honest feedback. And that means it's just pointless feedback, because they don't want to hurt you or your children's feeling, and that's not good. So as long as those are all taken care of, your child's application requires extensive feedback and modification multiple times. So with our students, sometimes we do this, how many times, Veronica? Like 3, 4, 5, 6, depending on who it is. If they're not good, 6 times, back and forth. No, do it again. Because it takes that amount of time, and somebody who doesn't who sends something that has not been proofread versus someone that has proofread it just is night and day. The first draft to the final draft is like, oh my god, It's still the same experiences, it's still the same person, but it's just so different, and it shows the level of conscientiousness that a first draft does not demonstrate. I think those would be the things that I would do in the regard of a situation where you have an applicant that's got low GPA. This is how to go around it and be able to get into a fantastic college or university if you take care of all these other 6 things. Veronica, any final thoughts?
No, I think you covered it. I guess the one component that we want to add about is just the potential of having to prepare for an interview, right? If you are invited for an interview, if there is an interview component, then you don't want your whole application up until that point to be flawless. And then you go into that room and then everything falls apart just based on the lack of preparation. So really understanding, especially I think if you're coming out of high school and you don't necessarily have that much professional experience, that much experience interviewing, it's absolutely critical that you understand what the interview format is, what types of questions you might be asked, and then of course how to answer different types of questions. So I think definitely not overlooking the potential interview aspect is another component that you're going to need to ace if you want to get in with a low GPA.
Fantastic. So let's recap. Here's the 6 strategies you need in order for you to get into a top tier college or university, even with a low GPA. First strategy is provide an honest explanation about why the GPA is low and own up to that responsibility. Second strategy is make sure you score high on any sort of a standardized test that is required. Third strategy is engage in meaningful extracurricular activities that show progression and commitment. Fourth strategy is get fantastic letters of recommendation from people who actually know you. Fifth strategy is make sure that your college essays and application are absolutely fantastic. And finally, sixth strategy is make sure you're completely prepared for that interview if the application process requires you to attend an interview. With that said, thanks so much for watching. If you have a friend who's got a low GPA and they're worried about their admissions prospect to a top tier program, go ahead and share this with them. If you want to watch any of our future episodes, go ahead and subscribe on whatever social media channel you're watching this, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.
Take care.